There are moments when even darkness can silence the entire world. A blind girl sitting by a deserted lake shore sings a haunting melody that seems to summon the ghosts of the past. No microphone, no stage, only water wind and a dog lying still by her feet, as if guarding a secret buried long ago. But then her voice was recorded by accident by a child. And by the next morning, all of Ghana was shaken. No one knew her name. No one could explain why that voice hurt so deeply. Until the light returned, and she stepped onto the stage one last time to sing her final note. A note that didn't just say goodbye to the past. It awakened something sleeping in all of us. Subscribe now to never miss a single chapter of our cinematic, emotional, and deeply human storytelling series. The sky over Lake Bosomtwe was a faded palette of soft violet and amber, the kind of color only seen for a few fleeting minutes before the sun broke free from the edge of the earth. Mist rolled slowly across the water, like the breath of an ancient spirit curling through the low palms and brushing against the weather-worn boats pulled ashore. There was no traffic, no city noise, only the quiet shush of the lake and a single unmistakable sound rising from its shore. A voice. It came gently, then grew clear, aching, and full. It floated over the surface of the water with a kind of haunting beauty that could still time. Notes rose and fell like waves brushed with a hint of sorrow so deep it felt ancestral. You didn't just hear it, you felt it in your chest, in the soles of your feet, like a forgotten prayer returning home. The camera glides toward the source, a young woman sitting on a weathered wooden bench under a crooked baobab tree. Her skin is the color of earth after rain. Her face is turned slightly upward, as if tracking the wind with her cheek. She wears a faded white wrap, her bare feet covered in fine lake dust, and her fingers dance lightly over the strings of a worn guitar. Her name is Akua. She is 24, and she is blind. At her side, curled like a shadow of devotion, lies an old golden-brown dog, scarred, limping, loyal. Its ears twitch with every shift in her melody, eyes fixed toward the forest line, like it's waiting for something the world forgot. Akua's song isn't just music, it's memory. Her voice carries a weight. She doesn't sing for applause. She sings like it's the only thing keeping her heart from falling apart. A fisherman in the distance stops casting his net. A woman carrying plantains on her head pauses on the narrow path above. Even the wind seems to quiet. Then slowly, a voice overlays the scene. Not hers, someone older. A narrator, weathered and wise, begins to speak in a slow, reverent tone. Some say the lake has a soul, that it listens, that it remembers, that sometimes late in the dark or just before morning breaks you can hear it sing. They call her the voice of the lake, but no one truly knows who she is. The shot widens. The village of Obono lies quietly behind the trees. Small clay houses, tin roofs, glinting in the breaking light. The camera glides past wooden stalls still empty from the night before, past quiet goats and a child asleep on a mat. The world is still waking up, but the song, her song, has already stirred something in the air. We return to Akua now, halfway through her melody. Her lips barely move, her body still. She sings as though in trance, like she's listening to something beyond this world. The dog lets out a soft, almost human sigh. There is a tenderness between them, one that speaks of long nights, shared silence, and the kind of trust that forms when no one else remains. From the forest path beyond the hill, the sound of distant footsteps crunching on dry earth, quick, uneven. A small figure appears weaving between trees, glancing left and right with frantic energy. A boy no older than 10, his shirt torn at the sleeve and his backpack half open. Dust cakes his sandals and a scratch bleeds quietly down the side of his knee. This is Kojo. He's panting, lost. He doesn't know where he is or how far he's run. The map in his hand is damp with sweat. Somewhere behind him, faint echoes of angry adult voices chase him through the forest. But he doesn't stop running until he hears her, the music. Kojo slows confused. The song pulls at something inside him, an ache he can't name. It's nothing like the noise from his classroom radio or the gospel his grandmother plays in the morning. This is something else. Like hearing sadness breathe. He steps off the path, brushing branches aside. There's a clear patch just above the ridge, overlooking the lakeside bench. He crouches low in the tall grass, eyes wide, heart racing. But not from fear anymore. Akua, she's right there. A girl not much older than his sister, singing like the lake was inside her. Her face so calm it looks like she's floating. The dog shifts its weight and sniffs the air, catching Kojo's scent, but does nothing. Just watches. Kojo pulls out his phone, hands shaking, and starts recording. Click! The song rises again this time, almost like it knows someone new is listening. Cut back to the narrator, now layered over slow shots of the lake, changing color as the sun begins to break fully through the trees. She comes with the dawn and leaves with the wind. Some say she was once a star. Others that she is the last song of a broken girl. I've heard them all. But I say this, that voice, it's not from here. And if you hear it, you don't forget. Kojo, eyes still locked on Akua, blinks. His mouth is slightly open. His phone shakes in his hands, the camera drifting off center. But he doesn't care. His world for these few minutes is silent, except for her voice. Then something shifts. Akua stops singing. She turns her head slightly as if sensing the presence in the air. Her brows furrowed, gentle but precise. Who's there? She asks, voice barely above a whisper. Kojo flinches, drops his phone. The recording ends abruptly. The dog sits up alert now, eyes trained directly toward the bushes where Kojo hides. Akua lifts her hand and gently places it on the dog's head. A soft hum escapes her lips, something between a lullaby and a command. The dog calms, instantly lies back down. I know you're there, she says again, this time more certain. Kojo doesn't answer. He slowly crawls backward, rustling leaves. A twig snaps. His heart hammers in his chest. Akua tilts her head. You don't have to be afraid. Kojo stares, unsure what to do. He's never seen a blind person before. He thought they didn't see anything. But it's clear somehow. She knows. A long pause, then she smiles. It's the kind of smile you can't fake. Soft, forgiving. Like a candle lit for a stranger. Thank you for listening, she says. Kojo swallows hard, then runs, cut to black. A title fades in white over darkness. The last note. The story of Akua. A single piano chord echoes soft and unresolved. Fade back to Kojo sprinting through the trees, the lake now behind him. He doesn't look back. His backpack bounces against his back. His phone clenched tightly in his hand. The seed has been planted. The voice is no longer a secret. And Akua's world, quiet for so long, is about to erupt into sound. The applause was thunderous. It filled the National Auditorium in Accra like a wave crashing into stone. Flashing lights pulsed across the packed rows of judges, parents, music scholars, and strangers, whose only common bond was the voice they had just witnessed. Akua stood center stage 17, dressed in a deep crimson gown that shimmered when she turned her head. Her hair was pulled back in a soft braid, and her eyes, sharp, shining full of fire, searched the lights above her, like she was already looking at the future. A single tear clung to her cheek, though she was not crying. She was winning. That night, Akua had performed a rendition of Odo Yu, a traditional soul aria fused with her own arrangement. Her voice hadn't just filled the hall, it had claimed it. There was power in it. Old power. Power born from pain, heritage, and something more, something raw, untamed. When she hit the final note, a long vibrato that hovered just above silence, you could feel the air change. She won the grand prize. A standing ovation. An offer from the National School of the Arts. A video of the performance went viral. She became overnight the girl with the voice that made people feel again. But voices can't protect you from fate. 2 years later, Akua sat by the window of her campus dormitory, her fingers tracing the ridges of her silver music medal as she stared out at the Accra skyline. It was dusk, the kind of soft gold light she liked best when the buildings looked like ghosts and the city held its breath. Her phone rang. She hesitated, then answered. It was the neighbor from her home village. There was no gentle preamble. "Your mother passed this morning." Silence. Akua gripped the window's edge, her breath catching in her chest. "Stroke," the woman added. "They found her in the garden." Akua's fingers curled slowly around the phone. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just listened. To the stillness. To the way the city outside seemed to pause for her grief. The bus ride home was long and slow. The sun dipping below the savannah as the vehicle rumbled down the cracked highway. Akua sat alone, earphones in head resting against the window. She wasn't listening to music. The world was too quiet for that. In her lap, a paper envelope. Inside, the eulogy she'd written by hand. Her mother had been everything. When Akua first discovered she could sing, not just well, but beautifully, it was her mother who made her sing to the trees. If the birds stopped to listen, she'd said, "Then you're doing it right." Her father had been less encouraging. A frustrated composer who once toured with a regional band but never made it beyond local fame. He saw Akua's gift as a threat, a mirror that reflected what he could never be. While her mother nurtured, her father warned. A good voice is like fire. Without control, it burns everything. Akua watched the sky shift to charcoal as the bus made a wide turn near Lake Volta. She reached for her water bottle. Then it happened. The sound of tires shrieking, a lurch, screams, a blinding flash of white, then darkness. Not the kind you get when you close your eyes. No, this was the kind of darkness that stretches inside you. 3 weeks later, Akua sat upright in a narrow hospital bed in Kumasi. Her head wrapped in bandages, her hands trembling against the sheets. The left side of her body ached. There were stitches near her temple. Her voice had been hoarse for days. But that wasn't what kept her quiet. She couldn't see, not the IV line, not the doctor with the soft voice, not the nurse who held her wrist. Just shadows. Just the faintest pulse of light, like someone holding a candle behind a curtain. Akua gripped the edge of the bed. Is it permanent? The doctor hesitated. There was significant trauma to the optic nerves. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice cracked. Will I ever sing again? The doctor didn't answer that question. Not then. She returned home weeks later in a state somewhere between silence and sleep. Her father met her at the station, not with an embrace, but with a stern nod. He carried her bags like they were filled with disappointment. Inside the house, the rooms were darker than she remembered. Her mother's things still hung on the walls, woven fans, framed photos, a broken radio she never fixed. Akua sat in the living room, her cane tapping uncertainly across the tiled floor. Her father stood over her. I heard what the doctor said. Akua said nothing. You can't go back to school like this. Still, she said nothing. Music, he paused. Music requires more than sound. You need vision. You need timing. Presence. You can't command a stage if you can't see it. Akua tilted her head slightly. Are you saying I should quit? I'm saying you should accept what's happened. She stood shaky but steady. I haven't lost my voice. You've lost everything around it. That night, Akua sat in her mother's garden, the one where she used to sing to the trees. The air smelled of earth and smoke. Her fingers brushed the neck of the guitar she hadn't touched in months. She strummed. Wrong key. She adjusted. Better. Her father watched from the window, eyes narrowed. She sang, voice low, breaking, but there. He closed the curtains. 3 days later, he gave her an ultimatum. You can stay, but not as a singer. You want to live here, you help with chores. You do something useful. But I won't have a blind girl wasting time singing to no one. Akua stood in the doorway, her backpack on the floor, her dog, Nina, sitting beside her. The dog had found her at the clinic, a limping stray that refused to leave her bedside. It was the only creature that followed her home. Akua smiled bitterly. I'm not singing to no one. I'm singing to the only thing that still hears me. Her father looked away. She picked up her bag, walked out the door, didn't look back. For the first week, she slept behind a mechanic's shop near the edge of town. Nina curled into her chest. She begged at intersections, played soft melodies on the corner when she could. Most ignored her. A few dropped coins, One woman gave her bread. She made her way slowly to the Lake Bosomtwe, her mother's favorite place, the last memory she had of family that didn't ache. She found an abandoned hut near the waterline roof, cracked, but walls intact. There she made her home. Nina hunted scraps. Akua sang to the water. It listened. One night she sat by the shore toes, in the cool sand, guitar in lap. She sang not for money, not for fame, but to remember that she was still alive. Her voice carried echoing against the hills. In that moment, in the still of night, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole, even if no one else saw it, even if she couldn't see them. Her eyes were gone, but her voice was still here, and she would never let it go. The lake never asked questions. It never demanded anything from her. It didn't pity her. It simply was. And so was she. Each morning before the sun broke free from the trees, Akua would rise from her thin mat on the floor of the old fisherman's hut she now called home. She moved with careful practiced steps, counting each creak in the warped wood planks, each breeze through the cracks. She didn't need eyes to know the world around her. The lake told her everything. By the time the first boat paddled across the shoreline, she would already be in her place, a flat stone beside the water, her guitar resting in her lap, her back to the trees, Nina curled loyally at her feet. She played with the quiet devotion of someone who had nothing left but the music. There was no crowd, no stage, no lights, just fishmongers setting up baskets, women laughing as they washed clothes, children darting barefoot across the shallows, chasing chickens that had no interest in being chased. And her voice, still full, still alive, still carrying the ache of everything she had lost and everything she refused to forget. They didn't always appreciate her. A group of teenage boys passed one morning clucking like hens, mocking the way she tilted her head to listen for coins dropping into her tin cup. "Sing, blind girl, make the fish dance." Another joined in laughing. Or maybe she sings for ghosts. Laughter erupted behind her. Akua didn't flinch. She let her fingers glide across the strings and struck a note so sharp it cut through the wind. Then she began to sing not to them, but past them. She sang with the gravity of someone who knew something they never would, that shame only sticks if you let it. By the time the final note fell, the boys had gone silent. One of them dropped a coin in her tin and didn't say a word. She didn't need to see their faces to know she'd changed something. Nina wagged her tail once and settled back at her side, keeping one ear cocked toward the path behind them. It was always like that. The ones who laughed at her first were often the ones who lingered the longest. But it didn't mean she belonged. Most days, she was invisible. People passed by her the way they passed a stone on the road, seen, registered, forgotten. There was a woman who sold boiled eggs and pineapple skewers on a rickety table near the ferry dock. Every third day or so, she would quietly leave an extra skewer near Akua's feet, wrapped in a napkin. She never spoke. Akua never asked why. They had that understanding, the silent exchange of dignity. But kindness didn't pay for food. Not enough, not always. So Akua learned to stretch everything. Meal strings, hope. She rationed rice with the precision of a soldier. She bartered old melodies for a fish or a handful of plantain chips. And when that failed, she sang longer, deeper, until the tin rang with sympathy. Her voice was her currency. Her voice was her armor. But even armor wears thin. Some nights, she would return to the hut, strip off her worn sandals, and just lie there on the floor, staring into the pitch-black void of her world. Not because she was tired, but because there was no one left to share her exhaustion with. No mother to run her fingers through her hair. No audience to whisper her name. No one, except Nina. The dog never left her side. Ever since she'd limped into Akua's hospital room and collapsed at her feet, Nina had become more than a pet. She was a sentinel, a shadow, a friend. And sometimes Akua admitted quietly to herself the only thing keeping her from falling into the silence forever. Nina had a gift too. She knew people. Before they ever opened their mouths, Nina could tell who meant harm. Her ears would prick. A low growl would vibrate through her chest. When that happened, Akua knew to stop playing, to grip the leather strap of her bag a little tighter, to edge toward the path that led back into the trees. She'd been followed once. A man she didn't recognize. He pretended to be friendly at first, said he'd heard about her voice, wanted to help her get noticed. But his tone was all wrong. Honey laced with something sour. She felt it in his footfalls, too slow, too heavy. Nina had sensed it too. When the man reached for her arm, Nina lunged, not to bite, just enough to send a message. The man cursed and backed away, muttering something about crazy blind girls and mutts. She never heard his voice again. Nina saved her that night. Probably more than once. She often wondered, how does a dog know what even humans refuse to see? Akua didn't have a phone. She didn't have internet or television or even a working radio. The closest she got to the outside world was the overheard chatter of the people at the dock. Most of it didn't matter, but sometimes she caught pieces that stayed with her. He went viral. You know that dance guy from Akua, 2 million views in a day. Some girl just sings covers on TikTok and now she's in America. She didn't know what TikTok meant. Was it a show, a brand, a sound? It didn't matter. Not really. People like her didn't go viral. People like her barely got seen. But every night after the lake had gone quiet and the stars began to press into the black sky, Akua would sit outside her hut and sing anyway. Softly. Just for herself. For the memory of who she used to be. She kept a crumpled notebook hidden under her mattress, filled with lyrics, fragments of melody lines of poetry that came to her in dreams. She had no instruments beyond her old guitar and an overturned tin she used as a makeshift drum. But in that small moonlit world, she imagined orchestras. Cellos humming beneath her breath, violins tracing the edge of her words. She would close her eyes, though it made no difference, and let the music carry her to a time when the world still clapped for her, when people still called her name. She remembered the roar of the crowd. She remembered her mother's proud eyes. She remembered how it felt to belong, and still she sang, because music was the only place no one had taken from her, because silence was too much like death. But every once in a while, when the lake was too still, when even Nina's breathing was too soft, she would ask a question she was never ready to answer. What if I never return? What if this is all there is? The dreams she once held were like paper boats on the water, drifting further each day, growing softer, soaked through with time. She used to imagine the world finding her again, but these days she barely imagined at all. Until that morning, the one where she felt something change. She didn't know it yet, but something had shifted just slightly in the air. Something different in the way the wind moved, in the way Nina's ears twitched, in the way the lake listened. She sat by the dock, guitar in hand, her voice lifting slowly through the fog. She wasn't singing to anyone. She wasn't expecting anything. But in the trees beyond the dock, a boy was listening. And for the first time in years, her song would travel further than she ever thought possible. Kojo hadn't meant to go back. That morning, his grandmother had asked him to fetch cassava leaves from the market. It was a 20-minute walk into town, past the rust-colored cliffs that framed the lake. He had a list in his hand, a few crumpled CDs in his pocket, and strict instructions to come straight home. But his feet disobeyed. His heart remembered. He followed the same crooked path as before, ducking low under the hanging vines, moving quiet as a lizard over dry soil. The moment he crossed the ridge and heard her voice again carving clean lines through the air, his breath caught. She was still there, the blind woman by the lake. Kojo crouched behind the termite mound, the same spot he'd discovered a week before. His heart thudded in his throat as he peeked out. There she was, same tattered wrap, same gentle sway as her fingers danced across the guitar strings. Same dog head up, alert ears twitching, but otherwise calm. She didn't speak, didn't look, just sang. And that voice, it wasn't normal. It was full of something ancient, something sad and soaring. He didn't know much about opera or soul or folk, but he knew this, her voice didn't belong here. Not on this forgotten shoreline, not under that half-broken tree, not in silence. It was meant for stadiums, for speakers, for the world. Kojo pulled out his phone. A hand-me-down Infinix with a cracked screen and 5% battery. He swiped to video, pointed it in her direction, hit record. He didn't think about lighting or angle or how the wind might mess up the sound. He just pressed capture and held his breath. It wasn't perfect. The image was shaky. His finger covered the corner of the lens. The wind hissed. But the voice rang clear. He let the video run for 45 seconds, then stopped it. Pocketed the phone. Didn't move. Just listened until the song ended. He didn't clap, didn't speak. He just stood and walked away. Kojo's house was small. One room made of red clay roof, patched with bits of tarp and metal. His grandmother, Abena, sat outside peeling plantains, her scarf tied tight around her head. "You took too long," she said without looking up. "I got everything," Kojo replied, placing the bag by her feet. She squinted. "And what's this?" She pulled out a half-rotten tomato. He grinned nervously. "The seller gave me a discount." She smacked the back of his head. "Go fetch water, then finish your homework. If I see that phone again, I'll throw it into the lake." Kojo nodded, rubbing his scalp. But inside, he was already buzzing. His legs carried him to the water drum, but his mind raced back to that voice, that melody, that power. He kept hearing her. Even the birds didn't sound the same anymore. That night, while his grandmother snored in the far corner, Kojo curled under the mosquito net and pulled out his phone. Screen cracked, battery red, no Wi-Fi, but enough data to open TikTok. He stared at the video. 45 seconds. No hashtags, no edits, no effects. He didn't know what to write in the caption. So he typed, "I found this voice near Lake Bosomtwe. Don't know her name. Just listen." He hit post, closed the app, plugged the phone into the wall, and fell asleep. By the time the roosters crowed, his phone was vibrating nonstop. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, checked the screen. 23,941 views. He sat bolt upright. He refreshed. Cow 1, 23200, then 68017. His heart kicked into overdrive. He clicked the comments. "Who is she?" This voice just broke my chest wide open. "Someone find her, now!" I haven't cried in 5 years until this. Thank you. This is better than anything on the radio today. I need a full version. I'm begging. His fingers trembled. His mind reeled. He ran outside, barefoot, phone in hand. "Grandma." Abena was stirring millet porridge, her expression flat. "TikTok, Grandma." It blew up. I posted the lady, her voice, and it's like the whole country heard her. She gave him a side eye. "You think food cooks itself, boy?" "I'm serious," he shouted, showing her the screen. "Look." She squinted, scrolled, blinked. That's it." She handed him the ladle. "Stir this before it burns." Kojo groaned. "Grandma, this is big." She sat down slowly, watched him, then softer. "And what will you do when they come for her? When the cameras arrive? The money? The vultures?" He stopped stirring. "I just wanted people to hear her." She nodded. "Then let's hope they heard her heart, not just her voice." By lunchtime, it had hit 300,000 views. Influencers reposted it. News pages picked it up. A local radio station played the audio calling her the ghost singer of Bosomtwe. TikTok duets flooded the feed, kids lip-syncing, musicians layering tracks, pastors calling it anointed. People started demanding to know her name. Who is she? Where is she? She needs a record deal. She's the truth Ghana forgot. But no one knew. Not yet. Kojo sat in the schoolyard during lunch break, watching the numbers jump like popcorn. His classmates crowded around him, jostling for a look. "You really found her?" one boy asked. Kojo nodded. "She blind, right?" another sneered. "That's why she sings weird." "She doesn't sing," Weird Kojo snapped. "Whatever the boy said, I bet she smells like fish." Laughter. Kojo stood abruptly. "You wouldn't know real music if it slapped you in the face." The laughter stopped. He stormed off to the far wall of the yard, sat beneath the old mango tree, and watched the video again. This time, he listened differently, not like a secret, but like a responsibility. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but she had something in her voice, something sacred, and now the world had heard it. That night, as the stars spilled across the sky and the crickets sang their quiet choir, Kojo lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about going back, telling her what he did, showing her the video. But what if she was angry? What if she didn't want to be found? What if the world loved her voice, but hated the rest? He thought about turning off the comments, disabling duets, protecting her from the storm he had just unleashed. But then he remembered the way she tilted her head toward the lake, like she was singing to something far away. He remembered how steady she was, how fearless, even when no one clapped. She hadn't been afraid, so maybe he shouldn't be either. Somewhere in the city of Akua, a producer was watching the video on loopjaw, slightly open. In Kumasi, a music teacher paused her online class and said, This is what music used to feel like. In a village near Ho, a blind boy cried for the first time in months. The voice had left the lake, and it was ringing across a nation. But Akua didn't know. Not yet. She was still by the water, still singing, still wondering if her echo would ever be heard again. The video was no longer just a post. It was a phenomenon. By the third day, it had surpassed 1 million views. By the fifth, it had been dubbed into French, Ewe Twi, even Yoruba. A South African producer called it a spiritual cleanse. A Nigerian gospel choir recorded a full choral version and tagged it The Voice of Bosomtwe. News outlets picked it up with headlines like, Who is she Ghana's phantom singer? Shakes the internet, blind angel by the lake. TikTok's most haunting voice, a song heard. Round the world, but no one knows her name. The hashtags grew like wildfire. Bosomtwe voice, find her, echo of Ghana, but no one knew who she was. Not even Kojo. The video had taken on a life of its own, untethered from the boy who filmed it or the woman who sang. As more influencers latched on, beauty vloggers lip-syncing in waterfalls, travel bloggers claiming they'd just missed her on their Ghana tour, fiction took root. People started pretending to be her. One woman in Cape Coast wore a blindfold and sang off-key, claiming to be the original lake singer. Another in Tamale filmed herself with a rented dog and a fake guitar, whispering, I sing from my soul in every caption. Kojo watched it all with mounting nausea. He knew he should go back to the lake, tell her everything. But something kept stopping him. Guilt. Fear. Maybe even the terrifying idea that she might vanish once the mystery was solved. But she was already in danger of being rewritten, and that's when someone else decided to step in. The headquarters of the Nyaminati Foundation sat quietly on a side street in Kumasi, tucked between a youth choir studio and an orthopedic clinic. Founded a decade ago, the organization specialized in music therapy and creative training for blind and visually impaired youth. It was well known in the community, but barely visible on the national radar, until the video. Ama Owusu, the foundation's director, sat in her small office replaying the clip for the 15th time. Her desk was cluttered with grant papers and outdated headphones, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were closed. She was listening. The voice moved through her like memory. She had trained dozens of young artists, heard talent in all forms. But this was something else, not trained, not polished, but raw. Like the singer wasn't just telling a story, she was the story. Ama opened her eyes and leaned forward. Find her, she said to her assistant. Now. It wasn't easy. With the flood of copycats and fake tip-offs, the internet was no help. Kojo's account was private now, overwhelmed with spam. He hadn't shared a location, just Lake Bosomtwe. That narrowed it to several villages. Ama and her team began quietly asking around. Boatmen, vendors, children. Anyone who might have heard a voice like that, untrained, powerful echoing over water at dawn. One day, an old woman at a plantain stall whispered, There's a girl by the southern shore. Sings like no one's listening. She has a dog. That was enough. Akua sat by the water as always, her guitar resting on her knees, her fingers dancing lightly across the frets, whispering lullabies to the waves. She wasn't singing loudly that day. The sun was too hot. Nina had fallen ill 2 nights before and hadn't eaten since. Her breath was shallow now, her paws twitching in sleep. Akua hummed quietly, her voice trembling. She hadn't earned enough for medicine. Not that there was a vet nearby. She didn't know what to do except sing like the vibrations in her voice might soothe the pain. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until they were almost too close. Nina stirred weakly, but didn't growl. Akua turned her head sharply. Who's there? A soft, measured voice answered. My name is Ama. I came to listen. Akua's grip tightened on her guitar. Why? Because your voice reached me. And I think The world needs to hear it again. A silence passed between them. Wind, bird song, water. Then Akua said almost like a reflex, "I'm not for sale." Amma knelt gently into the sand beside her. "I'm not here to buy you." Akua's face softened, unsure how to hold those words. Her lips parted, then closed again. "Why now?" she asked. "I run a foundation for blind musicians, and I believe you're more than just a singer. I believe you're a sound the world forgot, and I'd like to help you remember." Akua's fingers hovered above the strings. "No one's helped me in a long time. Then maybe it's time someone did." Amma visited every day that week. She brought clean water bread and later a vet from the city who examined Nina. The dog had a parasite infection. Treatable. Recoverable. Akua cried when she heard that, but not in front of Amma. She waited until the woman left, then sat in the dark, hugging Nina, whispering thank you over and over into the dog's fur. On the 5th visit, Amma brought a tablet with a solar charger. She tapped the screen and handed Akua an earbud. "What is this?" "Just listen." The sound of her own voice filled her ear. Akua's breath caught. Then came the layers, guitars, synths, a choir. Duets, interpretations, people crying, laughing, praising, listening, all to her. It was too much. Akua yanked the earbud out, dropped it in the sand. Her whole body trembled. "No." Amma reached for her hand. "It's okay. I didn't ask for this." "No, but you deserve it." Akua turned away, burying her face in her hands. "It's been so long since anyone heard me, since anyone saw me. I thought I was done. I thought I was invisible. I thought..." Her shoulders shook. "I thought maybe my voice died when my eyes did." Amma squeezed her hand. "It didn't." Akua nodded slowly. Then quietly, almost like a confession. "People still hear me." Amma smiled. They never stopped. The hospital smelled like bleach and broken things. Akua sat rigid in a stiff-backed plastic chair, her hands resting motionless in her lap, the cotton wrap around her shoulders damp with sweat. She didn't tremble, but inside a cold war raged. She could feel the room shifting around her. The beeping monitors, the slow tread of nurses, the antiseptic air. But she didn't move. The world had always sounded bigger when she couldn't see it. In here, everything echoed. Amma sat beside her quiet, respecting the silence. A door opened. Footsteps. Male, careful, measured. A doctor's voice. "Miss Akua." She lifted her head slightly. "I'm here." The chair across from her creaked as he sat. "Thank you for coming in. I've reviewed your scans, and there's something we need to discuss." Her hands tensed. She nodded once. "You suffered severe optic nerve trauma during the accident. In most cases, the damage would be permanent. But there's a partial bypass still viable. A very thin strand of neural function that, if stimulated properly, could potentially allow you to recover partial vision." A pause. "How partial?" she asked. He inhaled. "At best 30 to 40%. Shapes, light, movement, maybe faces in time, with therapy. Is that worth seeing?" Amma started to speak, but Akua raised her hand. "I want him to answer." The doctor's voice softened. "Only you can decide that. But I've seen patients regain enough to function independently. Even create again." "Create," she whispered. "You mean sing better?" He paused. "Not necessarily, but perhaps see what you're singing about." Another silence. "Then, if you choose to move forward, we can schedule the procedure within 2 weeks. It would be fully funded." She didn't ask who was funding it. She just nodded, but inside her stomach twisted. That night, she stood at the edge of the lake, barefoot, cold water licking her ankles. The stars blinked above her like distant lanterns she couldn't reach. The world felt unbearably large. What if she opened her eyes and didn't belong anymore? What if the world she imagined in her music, the golden villages, the mother with kind eyes, the color of memory, was nothing but a lie? What if seeing took the magic away? She touched her own face gently, like trying to memorize its shape from the outside in. "Do I really want to know?" she whispered to the wind. "What's real and what isn't?" Behind her, Nina let out a weak cough. Akua turned. The dog had been declining for days now. She barely ate, barely stood. Her body had begun to shake with every breath. The vet had warned her Nina was old, too old. The medicine was helping, but the battle was bigger than any injection. That night, as the wind curled around the hut, Akua held Nina in her arms like a child and began to hum. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't even a song. It was a cradle of sound, raw and unpolished. Her lips trembled. Her breath broke. But the lullaby came anyway. It came from a place deeper than memory, deeper than pain. She had sung for strangers. She had sung for survival. But this song was for goodbye. The next morning, Nina couldn't stand. Akua knew what was coming. She placed a blanket beside her, lay down next to the dog's forehead against its fur. "I'm going in tomorrow," she whispered. "To maybe see again. To maybe find out what I've been missing." Nina didn't move. Akua laughed, softly bitter. "I used to think I'd want to see the world, the stages, the bright lights. But now," her fingers ran gently along Nina's spine, "I think I just want to see you, just once." The dog's ear twitched. Akua closed her eyes. "If you leave while I'm gone, wait for me by the lake." The next day was bright and cold. Akua sat in the surgical prep room, wrapped in a thin gown, monitors trailing from her fingers. Nurses moved around her in a careful blur. Amma stood nearby, phone turned off, eyes red from a night without sleep. "You can still back out," she said gently. "No one will blame you." Akua turned her head toward the window. "I used to be afraid of silence. After the accident, it haunted me. But now, I think I'm more afraid of the noise coming back." Amma nodded. "What made you decide?" Akua smiled faintly. "I had a dream last night. My mother was singing to me. And Nina, she was running in a field. She wasn't sick. She was happy." A breath, a beat. "I think it's time I stopped dreaming blind." The operating room was quiet, sterile, alien. As the anesthesia crept into her bloodstream, Akua whispered something only she could hear. "Please don't take the music away." And then, darkness. She woke up to a blur. Everything was white, not dark, not void. White. She blinked. Pain danced behind her eyelids. Pressure. Strain. The bandages were partially removed. Something soft glowed at the edge of her awareness. A shadow moved. A voice, Akua. It was Amma. Akua blinked again. Shapes moved. The edge of a face, a blur of light. Then she saw it, a frame on the wall. At first just color. Then slowly the outline of a face, a smile, eyes like hers. It was a photograph, old, faded, worn. Her mother. Akua's hand flew to her mouth. She sobbed, once raw, sharp, uncontrollable. Her mother was the first thing she saw. Not a doctor, not a light, not even herself. Her mother. Hours passed before she could speak clearly. Amma sat beside her, holding her hand steady and patient. "I saw her," Akua whispered. "I know," Amma said. "I thought I'd forgotten her face, but my heart didn't." Amma nodded. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Akua looked out the window where morning light spilled across the floor like honey. "Yes," she said, "but it's beautiful." And then she smiled. For the first time, not with her voice, not with her music, but with the new light inside her eyes. The first thing she noticed about seeing again was how different everything looked from how she had imagined it. The lake wasn't silver, it was murky green with veins of brown. The trees weren't rows of graceful giants, but crooked, knotted limbs clawing into the sky. The faces of people, those she'd only known by voice or memory, didn't match what she'd seen in her mind. Even her own reflection felt like a stranger. Her eyes could only process about 30% of the world, and even that came with migraines and motion sickness. The doctors called it a miracle. The internet called it a resurrection. But Akua wasn't sure what to call it yet. The world didn't wait. The moment news leaked that she had regained partial sight, the requests poured in. Offers, interviews, invitations. She hadn't even left the hospital when a major Ghanaian television network reached out. Their primetime music show, Legends Reborn, wanted Akua to perform in a live televised tribute to voices that changed the nation. She was to be the final act, the closer, the miracle girl. At first she said no. Amma understood. You don't owe them anything. But the calls kept coming. Comments flooded in. Will she sing again? Was it all real? What if she's just a one-hit wonder? If she doesn't perform, she's hiding something. The pressure was like a rope tightening around her chest. She hadn't picked up her guitar in days. She could barely sleep. Her voice felt rusty in her throat like it belonged to someone else. When she finally did pick it up again, the strings felt alien. She missed the dark. She missed the quiet certainty of blindness. But something changed one afternoon when she sat outside staring at the blurry horizon where lake met sky. Kojo appeared. He'd come with Amma. Taller than she remembered. Nervous, but proud. He sat beside her in silence for a while, then pulled something from his bag. It was the phone, the same one he'd used to record her. I thought, "You should have this," he said, voice low. She hesitated, then took it. He tapped the screen, showing her the video. Her own voice filled the air, raw and unfiltered, shaky footage and all. "This," he whispered, "is when the world remembered you." She listened, cried, and finally said, "Okay, I'll sing again." The show was to be held at the National Theater in Akua. Gleaming glass, red carpets, scaffolding that buzzed with engineers and camera crews. For days, the venue echoed with rehearsals, light checks, ego clashes. Akua's name was everywhere, but not everyone was happy. One performer in particular, Selassie J, watched from the wings with quiet fury. She had come in second place at the same vocal competition Akua had once won. For years she'd been climbing gig to gig, always in Akua's shadow. And now, after everything, this girl returns and steals the finale. No, not tonight. Selassie had a plan. The night arrived like thunder. Outside the theater, crowds swelled. Hashtags trended. Reporters shouted over each other. Inside, the energy buzzed like static. 10 acts, flawless makeup, choreographed lights, rehearsed emotions. And Akua, pacing in the dressing room. She stared into the mirror. Her own eyes still startled her. She couldn't see the audience. Not clearly. Just shapes, motion, light. But the fear that she could feel. "What if I can't do it?" she whispered. Amma, seated beside her, leaned in. "You already did." Backstage, as crews moved like ants and countdowns flashed on the monitors, Akua was fitted with a mic. Her guitar was tuned. Her name lit up on the rotating screen above the stage. Akua, the final note. Selassie stood nearby, pretending not to look. She glanced toward the stagehand in charge of the audio feed. A silent exchange. A subtle nod. Akua walked out onto the stage, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The lights blinded her. The crowd was a sea of movement and color, no faces, just outlines. Her heart thudded like a war drum in her chest. She took her place at center stage, gripped the guitar. The announcer's voice boomed. "Tonight we close with a voice that returned from silence, a voice that reminds us what it means to believe again. Ladies and gentlemen, Akua." Applause exploded. She raised the mic, and nothing happened. No sound, no feedback, nothing. She tapped it. Still nothing. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Cameramen shifted. The band behind her exchanged glances. Panic. Amma stood in the wings, eyes wide. Kojo, watching from the balcony, stood up in his seat. The host stepped forward awkwardly, smiling, trying to stall. Akua stood frozen. The voice that brought a country to tears was being swallowed by silence. And then she stepped back, dropped the mic, raised the guitar, and sang. No amplification, no backing track, no spotlight, just her voice. It cracked on the first note, but she didn't stop. She closed her eyes. What little vision she had faded to black. She remembered the lake, the wind, her mother, Nina, Kojo's trembling camera. She sang to all of it. Every note climbed like a child returning home. The audience went quiet. No phones, no whispers, just stillness. By the end of the first verse, a few people were crying. By the second chorus, the entire theater was silent. And when she hit the final note, long, aching, beautiful, it hung in the air like a suspended miracle. Then, thunderous applause. People stood, screamed, cried. The cameras caught her face. Tears streaming, mouth trembling, hands shaking. She bowed once, and the lights dimmed. There was no music, no piano, no guitar, no mic to carry the sound. Just breath and silence. Akua stood alone at the edge of the stage, her bare feet resting on polished wood, still warm under the theater lights. Behind her, the backing band had quietly stepped back. The technician at the soundboard stood, frozen hands hovering above dead channels. The room, a National Theater packed with thousands, was silent. She took a step forward. The lights softened, faded, until only a soft white glow remained, casting a narrow circle around her like moonlight trapped in a bottle. She closed her eyes, took one breath, then began to sing. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was naked, tender, unfiltered. Her voice, without any tools to dress it up or armor to protect it, rose from somewhere deep below memory, below fear. The first line was almost a whisper. I forgive the voice that told me I'd never be enough. It drifted into the rafters. I forgive the silence that followed after I broke. Somewhere in the dark, a man in the third row swallowed hard. A woman pressed her hand to her chest. And I forgive the hands that let me go when I was still holding on. Her voice cracked on that line. She didn't try to hide it. She let it break. This wasn't performance. This was confession. She opened her eyes. The world blurred as it always did now, but she could make out the outlines. Rows of bodies, faces, people leaning forward, breath held, like they didn't dare disturb the moment. She kept singing, I owe you more than I can say, Mama. For every dawn you made without song, so I could learn how to sing one. Her lips trembled. She blinked quickly, trying to steady herself. But the tears came anyway. She didn't stop. You stayed quiet when he raised his voice. You held the strings of my name when I forgot how to hold myself. And now I sing, Mama. I sing because you did not. A woman in the balcony audibly sobbed. The camera zoomed in slowly from stage right. Her profile silhouetted against the light. Her voice raw and tired, but honest in a way no auto-tune could fake. And Papa, I don't know if you're out there, but I sing this to the place where your pride used to live. I sing this where your music once kept mine prisoner. I sing not to shame you, but to free myself. She took a breath. Her hands shook at her sides. She closed her eyes again. The final verse came slowly, deliberately, every word a release. And Nina, I know you waited. I know you watched me leave that morning tail thumping just once. And when I came home, the blanket was folded. The silence was full. The lake, so still. A pause, a catch in her throat. You never barked for goodbye. So I sing it now. The final note was not perfect. It wavered. But it carried the weight of everything she had endured. Grief, loss, abandonment, and survival. It held them all. It held her. And then it was gone. A full 10 seconds passed. No one moved. No one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't. It was as though they'd forgotten how to breathe. Then the wave hit. Applause. Screaming. Standing ovation. But Akua didn't hear it right away. She had fallen to her knees, hands covering her face, shoulders heaving. She wasn't sobbing from pain. It was release. As the lights warmed again, casting golden halos across the stage, she slowly lifted her head. Tears streamed down her face, but her lips curled softly, shyly into a smile. Her first real smile in the light. The crowd roared louder. Amma stood backstage, hand over her heart, whispering, "You did it." Kojo in the balcony raised both fists, tears soaking the collar of his shirt. Even Selassie, standing near the exit with clenched fists, looked away ashamed. And somewhere far away, in a quiet house near a forgotten village, an old man watched the broadcast through static. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath unsteady. But when the screen showed her face and that smile, he placed one trembling hand over his chest. "I'm sorry," he said aloud. "My daughter, I'm so sorry." Within an hour, the clip had been uploaded to YouTube, then TikTok, then Instagram. Within 12 hours, it was featured on BBC Africa, then CNN. Blind singer stuns Guyana, no mic. Just truth. The final note that broke the internet. Akua the voice. The world tried to forget. Duets flooded in. Transcripts were translated into 15 languages. A young choir in New York covered the full piece word for word, but nothing matched the original. Because that wasn't just a performance, it was a reckoning. In the days that followed, Akua didn't speak to the press. She didn't do interviews. She didn't explain. She just stayed by the lake. Sometimes at sunset, she would stand at the shoreline, eyes closed, head tilted to the wind, not to listen, to remember, because she had finally said everything that needed to be said. And the world had listened. The album was titled The Last Note. 12 tracks, no features. Minimal instrumentation, just a threadbare guitar, a few ambient textures, and her voice unpolished, unrepentant, and unmistakably real. The cover was stark, a silhouette of Akua, standing barefoot at the lake's edge. The water behind her dark as ink, but the sky above pulsing with color. Not bright, not blinding, but rising. No one expected an album like this to sell. No auto-tune, no pop hooks, no choreography or filtered perfection. But it did. In the first week, The Last Note charted across West Africa. By the third, it had reached Europe. By month's end, it had become a phenomenon. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Every song told a chapter of her journey from the silence of her hospital room to the moment she sang goodbye with nothing but her breath. Critics called it an audio memoir, a pain, faith, and defiance. Listeners called it a resurrection. Akua called it a letter I forgot to mail to myself. But that wasn't the part that mattered most. At the press conference, when asked what she would do with her first major royalty check, Akua didn't hesitate. "I'm building something," she said. "Not for me. For those who were born in silence, but never stopped singing inside." The audience leaned in. "I'm starting a scholarship fund. For blind children who want to learn music. For every version of me who never got the chance. I'll call it the Nina Fund." Her voice caught slightly at the name. The room fell quiet. "I can't bring her back," she said, blinking against the light, "but maybe I can make sure her spirit keeps leading someone home." Kojo's grandmother cried when she got the letter. The envelope was heavy, thick, like something from a bank, the stamp embossed with a dove and a musical staff. She opened it slowly, Kojo standing by, chewing his bottom lip. Inside was a certificate acceptance to the first class of the Nina Fund Music Scholars. Full tuition, room and board, voice and piano training in Kumasi. Kojo stood in silence as she read. The light in his eyes barely flickered. Not from disbelief, but from the quiet realization that something he did, something so small and unplanned, had circled back in ways he couldn't begin to understand. The next day, he packed his things and traveled with his grandmother to the Foundation's newly opened music center by the lake. When he stepped off the bus, Akua was already waiting. She wore a long blue scarf and simple sandals. Her hair was pulled back in a modest twist, and her eyes still blurry. Still searching, lit up when she heard his voice. "You made it," she smiled. "I didn't think you'd remember me," he said. "I hear you in every note." She reached out and he took her hand. That evening they sat at the dock with a borrowed keyboard and her guitar. The sunset stained the water gold. Kojo's voice, cracking from nerves, began to hum a melody he'd written. Akua joined in. And together their voices floated across the lake, young and old survivor, and spark bound by something that could never be broken. 1 week later, at the Foundation's inaugural concert, the auditorium filled with families, teachers, and curious strangers drawn by the story of a blind singer who'd found her way back to the light. Akua didn't headline. She sat in the front row, a quiet supporter, proud mother to a new generation of voices. The children performed in groups, some in harmony, some off-key, but every one of them brave, fearless, free. The final performance came from a young girl named Akua, barefoot, blind, 8 years old. Her voice trembling but sweet. She began a familiar melody. Akua's breath caught. It was a song she hadn't heard since she was 7. A lullaby. One her mother used to sing when the power cut out and the darkness swallowed everything. She closed her eyes, and that's when she felt it. A presence. She turned slowly, heart pounding. At the very back of the hall, near the exit door, stood a man, older now, thinner. His coat was too big and his hat pulled low, but his posture, his hands. She knew him, even after all these years. He hadn't come forward, hadn't asked for forgiveness, hadn't sent word. But there he was, her father. His hands were pressed to his mouth, his eyes wet. And when Akua hit the second verse, he dropped into the nearest chair, face crumpling. Akua didn't move. She simply listened. To her past, to her future, to the music between them that never truly left. The road to Lake Bosomtwe felt both familiar and completely new. The trees still leaned inward like elders whispering to each other. The earth still crumbled in soft orange powder underfoot, but the light was different. Akua walked slowly, taking it in, not rushing, just being. For the first time in years, she could see more than outlines and shadows. She could see the way the morning sunlight rippled off the lake's surface, how the leaves overhead shimmered gold and green at the same time, how the clouds didn't just float, they danced. She stopped at a bend in the path, her hand grazing the rough bark of the old baobab tree she had leaned against so many mornings. Her breathing slowed. She removed her sandals and continued barefoot, the warm soil cradling every step like an old friend welcoming her home. When she reached the lake shore, the breeze greeted her first. It swept through her scarf, tugged gently at her dress, then curled around her fingers, as if testing whether she was still real. She stepped down onto the same flat rock where she had once sat, guitar and lap blind to everything but sound. Now she could see the water curve beyond the far trees, the shimmer of a fisherman's net in the distance, a small child skipping stones on the opposite bank. The world was whole again, not perfect, not complete, but whole. She sat, closed her eyes, and listened. There it was, the water still whispering, the birds still arguing, the wind still pulling songs from the branches. She smiled. "I missed you too," she whispered. Her guitar was old now. The lacquer faded. One tuning peg had to be forced gently or it would slip. But when she strummed, it still rang out with that worn, open-hearted tone that sounded like home. Akua didn't sing at first. She just played, a slow melody. One she hadn't written down, one she didn't need to. It came from the place beyond memory, the place where grief had finally quieted, where joy could sit beside it without apology. Then softly her voice followed. Low, warm, free. She didn't notice the dog at first. It crept in from the trees, tiny paws, silent ears perked. The coat was the same shade as Nina's, golden, with flecks of rust. The tail curled in the same gentle arch, the same soulful eyes. But it was smaller, younger, unscarred. It approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. Akua opened her eyes mid-note and saw it standing there watching her, like it had been waiting all this time. She smiled, lowered her guitar, reached out a hand. The dog padded forward, nuzzled gently into her palm. A sigh left her lips quiet and trembling. "Well, hello there," she whispered. "Took you long enough." She scratched behind its ear, and the dog let out a soft whine, as if recognizing something in her voice. Not just recognition, a return. They sat there together, woman and dog, facing the lake. The song rose again, this time with more certainty. No audience, no cameras, no expectation. Just one voice singing back to the water that had once held all her tears. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a farewell. It was an offering, a full circle breath. From above, the camera pulled back. The shoreline grew smaller. The lake stretched wide, and endless mountains wrapping around its edge like gentle arms. The trees swayed in rhythm with her voice. The sky blushed with the warmth of dusk. And through it all, Akua's melody floated upward. No lyrics, just sound. Sound that healed. Sound that remembered. Sound that forgave. It climbed weightless into the clouds. And then, fade to black. A line appears white against the silence. Every last note can be the beginning of someone else's soul. Silence lingers. Then, the sound of the lake. A single breath. And the soft, hopeful bark of a dog.